I heard people screaming in agony, and others were crying. Was it an accident? But seconds after seconds, the fireworks sounded more and more like gunshots. No, these were gunshots from the very beginning. People were running away. Some tripped over other people and hurt themselves in the process. Some grieved over the ones they were close to. Everyone was scared and confused. Panic and chaos were all over the place. No one knew what to do except for running away as fast as possible or to find cover. None were able to think clearly. I saw people who had guns in their pockets covering in fear. It's like they forgot that they had a gun with them. None were able to fight back. There were no heroes. And this is only a fraction of the consequence of their gun obsession. For example, in 2012, there was a mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, which killed 20 young children, 6 school personnel, and the mass shooter himself. There is also the Las Vegas shooting with Stephen Paddock, who entered the Mandalay Bay Hotel with over 20 guns with no motive or mental illness at all. He killed 58 people and injured more than 500 people. It also said that in 2003, there is about 500 deaths due to mass shooting. Every time, those mass shootings are shown in the news, but rarely shows other aspects of gun violence that causes way more death, which is gun suicides and gun homicide in general. Mass shootings are only a fraction of the cause of all the deaths related to firearms. In 2003, there was a total of 11,200 deaths in gun incidents, while in 2014, there were 12,570 deaths. This is 6 times as much as Canada, 7 times more than Sweden, and 16 times more than Germany. And this brings us this question: what caused all of this? The answer is very simple. Contrary to popular belief, it isn't the mental health issue of the mass shooter that is the cause. Though it is true that 60% of them have sort of mental illness. However, that doesn't explain anything, and far from it. Here are other factors that could be the cause for a mass shooting or just a gun homicide: alcohol, drug misuse, poverty, history of violence, and finally, the most important one, the easy access to gun in the US. According to gun violence statistics, we can see that it isn't getting better. The reason is that after a mass shooting, people simply buy more guns, and the Congress eases up the process by minimizing gun control that is already almost non-existent in the first place, even more. Then they even eased the restrictions on silencers. I mean, why would you need to use silencers if you're only using your gun to protect yourself? And that's because people are blaming on the mass shooter's mental illness and not on their gun laws and easy gun access. This is why it's getting worse and worse. The problem isn't the mass shooter. The problem is really their obsession with guns. First of all, the US is the only developed country with this problem, and he is the one who possesses the most privately owned guns in the world in 2007 with 88.8 guns for 100 people, which makes that pretty much all the adults have at least one gun. That didn't change even until 2015. It was still 88.8 guns per 100 people, but with a population of 321 million people and 270 million legally held civilian firearms. Also, with only 4.43% of the world population, the US owns 42% of the world privately owned guns. The one who took the second place was Yemen, with 54.8 guns for 100 people, but he was in a civil war. Not only that, if we were to compare with the UK, who has 4.06 million legally held firearms with a population of 64 million people, which gave 6.2 guns for 100 people in 2015. We can see that it's way too big of a difference. The number of victims in gun incidents in the UK is way less than that of the US. Only 30 died in 2015. So, to find the cause of their gun obsession, we need to go back in time, around the time of the American Revolution. One of the triggers was the Boston Massacre in 1770. Several colonists died due to the Britain's army. This is what made them fear the army. Thomas Jefferson, the future president of the time, regarded guns as a tool of oppression when in hands of the government and took it as a threat to their freedom. Not only that, they realized that it is costly to maintain an army. So they thought of another system that could protect them, the militia system. What is the militia system? To put it simply, it's an army composed of yeomen. Yeomen are people who aren't from the army but possess a private gun, when they use them to form an army to protect the country. However, it isn't really an army, and not all of them are trained soldiers. They didn't receive an actual training after all. The only things they had were their guns. What reinforced this idea was a myth which tells the Americans that the American Revolution was won thanks to the yeomen and the militia army, even though it was the Continental Army who was crucial in their revolution against Britain. This is why this belief still persists even today. To make matters worse, the founding fathers of the U.S. who wanted to protect the new independent nation feared other great countries at the time, which led to the Second Amendment of their Constitution. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Remember when I said that Americans felt threatened when the weapon is in the hand of the government? Well, even now, they still don't have any trust in their government. How do I say this? It's like their distrust of their own government turns into some sort of paranoia. Most of them being white men often called right-wing terror, and are becoming more and more of a threat. So much that even the FBI agrees with it. These people say that they will use guns for an armed revolution if necessary, since they don't have any trust with the government. They even have the weaponry to do so. Remember Stephen with his multiple guns? Apparently, that's not rare in the US. Many people have already amassed a lot of guns. This is why there isn't much of a gun control due to their past and their current mindset. However, there's another reason why there's almost no gun control. The influence of the NRA, the National Rifle Association. A gun lobby who believes that with gun control it would out all private gun ownership, which violates the Second Amendment of the US Constitution. First of all, according to the Pew Research Center surveys, most people agree in support for more gun control. So why, even now, the NRA is still winning in this battle for gun control? Well, money does play a part in it, and without it, they won't win. However, the amount of money that the NRA put in the election pales in comparison with other companies such as gun manufacturers, and yet, it is this very gun lobby who has the most influence. Even their lobbying isn't enough to explain why. So what is the answer? Well, it's their gun obsession once again. According to Robert Spitzer, professor of crime, law, policy, and gun control at the State University in New York, their members are extremely passionate about it and participate actively in the voting, such as going to meetings, writing a letter, or contacting a friend when other Americans barely even bother to vote. There are other factors like having a long history of 145 years, being more funded and more established than those who wanted gun control. Even if they were more established and more founded, the government would still side with the NRA, since they have more impact and more active than others during the vote while being the minority. So, to have gun control in the US, Americans need to be more active during the vote and of course, vote for the right candidate. Not only that, we will need people to actively approving gun control, just like what the teenagers have been doing with all kind of movement and speeches to convince people that they should have gun control or more victims will be hurt or even die. This is why the US needs more gun control. Many people died due to mass shooting and gun homicides. Those who have their close ones lost can only grieve for them and be scarred for the rest of their life. The NRA and people who support the policy of no gun control say that having more guns will help minimizing the amount of death. On the contrary, even more people will die. In 2003, a study had been published in the Annals of Emergency Medicine with the title of Homicide and Suicide Risk Associated with Firearms in the Home, a national case control study. Shows that having a gun in a house increases the chance of a person being shot and commit suicide. Not only that, in 2009, another study was published in the American Journal of Public Health named Investigating the Link Between Gun Possession and Gun Assault. It shows once again that you're more likely to get shot if you have a gun with you, and the same thing happens if you store guns in your home. Then, some people say that if they had guns during mass shootings, they could shoot the mass shooter and fewer would die. However, other data shows that it isn't true at all. Instead, it went up. Even if that were the case, they still won't solve gun homicide in general, since mass shooting is only a fraction of the death caused by gun homicide, and real life isn't an action movie. For example, the Mandalay shooting in Las Vegas, which is one of the deadliest in the US, it was so chaotic and confusing that some didn't even know that they were being shot at. The shooter wasn't an idiot either. He was in a position where he could see everyone and no one could really see him. No one could fight back even if they had a gun. Even if they can't see the shooter, it is rare to see people fighting back competently since their main goal is just to survive. They will just run away and try to find cover. We can see this is the video of the Mandalay shooting very well, and this doesn't apply only to normal civilians but to trained soldiers as well. Randall Collins agreed with that in his book Violence, a Microsociological Theory, published in 2009. Some soldiers attempt to burrow into the ground covering their faces and heads. It is a paralysis of terror, and sometimes troops in this condition are unable to even surrender, much less fight back, and are killed where they lie. This is why guns don't help. Caleb Keeter, who was at the Route 91 Harvest Festival when the shooting started, agreed on that. This is what he wrote. "I've been a proponent of the Second Amendment my entire life. Until the events of last night, I cannot express how wrong I was. We were actually have members of our crew with CHL licenses and legal firearms on the bus. They were useless. This leads to the conclusion that when they say you can't shoot at the mass shooter to minimize the damage, is not only completely useless, it also means that anyone who has a gun could kill someone, mass shooter or not. This also means that anyone could be a mass shooter as well, since they all have a gun after all." At last, I am going to talk about gun control. Unlike the US, many countries made their gun control stricter after a mass shooting. For example, in Australia, they banned a certain type of firearms such as automatic and semi-automatic rifles. They did it through a buyback program where they buy guns from the owners and established a registry of all guns and ensured that all the new firearms purchases are required to have a permit. The results are astounding. The gun homicide in Australia's firearms got reduced by 42% in the last 7 years after the law passed, and the gun suicide got reduced by 57%. The reason they made gun laws stricter is because of what happened in 1996. A 28-year-old man entered in a cafe and then ate lunch. After he had finished eating, he took out semi-automatic rifles and killed 35 and wounded 23 people in the process. The UK as well did the same thing. After the massacre in Scottish town of Dublin in 1996, which killed 16 children, the government immediately took action. They banned the ownership of handguns in mainland Britain, and the firearms amnesties took about 23,000 firearms with all the ammos. Anyone who disregards the new laws will receive heavy penalties, and the effect was obvious. I mentioned it before, the difference of gun incident and legally held guns are way less than the US. So, what made the difference in these situations which change their gun controls when the mass shootings in the US are way worse and frequent than these countries, but still don't have a good gun control? And that is due to their difference in gun culture. You see, in the UK, gun lovers and people in general use guns more for sports, and most of those who use guns are in the countryside. In the US, however, their main reason is for self-defense, while in the UK, they think that it is better for the police and the armed force to use it and not themselves. This is a difference in their gun culture. Now, to finish off this video, I want to say that guns aren't tools to protect yourself. They are tools to end someone's life, and it could be yours as well. Human lives are priceless. This is why we can't treat them like numbers. The law put in place by the government isn't fixed. We know that guns aren't good for the safety of the public in the US, and the facts show it very well. The US needs changes, and that is exactly what many people are starting to do. They've already started doing speeches and movement to achieve it. It is possible to have gun control in the US. They just need to convince more people to participate more actively for this cause, and the mass shooting will eventually go down, as well as gun homicide in general and gun suicide. Lives are precious. Once it's lost, you can never have it back.